don't know what you wanted to do with these signed forms. So I just put them in.
Hello.
Good afternoon, Tom.
Hey, Robert. Hi, Don. Hi, Al, Vlad, Amir, Grant, Jose. Jose, I still got to look up that email you sent me. I didn't get a chance to look at that question that you're asking about yet. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. I'm just going to bring up the, no, not that one. I'm going to bring up the slides that we were looking at. Can you see the PowerPoint? Great. Thanks, Jose. Perfect. And I'm just going to put it into there. Okay, so just put this here. So we're looking at I'm just going to go over the highlights of these two video lectures. But I'm going to hone in on I got a little case, well, an example simulation that I'm just going to walk people through afterwards. So I've loaded the slides for that under lectures. I think I called it lecture 5 discussion or live discussion or something like that, creative trades. So I'll pull that up afterwards, but for now, I just wanted to go over some highlights. So 5A is kind of just different ways that we can measure project progress, 6 different ways. And I guess the thing is to think about measuring project progress is that, number one, we might be measuring it for different purposes. One, we might be measuring it to get paid based on what we call the schedule of values. And so I discussed that in the video, but schedule of values is a breakdown of the overall project costs to areas of work. And then when you get percentages of that completed, that's kind of what they determine they're going to pay you, or what you can bill in your progress payments according to the schedule of values. So that's fine. So that's one method of measurement. And there's some constraints sometimes within that, how that can be interpreted for paying. And then of course, there's what we've been kind of focusing in on too, is more rather than measurement and payment, which we'll talk about in another class, cash flow and progress payments. But the other area is, can we know where we're at so we can figure out savings, potential savings going forward, how to save money and how to optimize opportunities as they come up. So that's another way of looking at it. So some of them lend themselves better to that than say others might. So as an example, the unit completed method is something that's fairly easy to sort of grasp, right? If you're dealing with, say, masonry, like Robert would relate to this, I'm sure, you know, bricks or blocks, how many have you done in a day? Or if you have on the project, that's for productivity. So we can look at how many are you doing in a day and how many are you doing in an hour and so on and so forth. But if we're doing units for measurement complete, then, well, if we have 100,000 blocks and we've got 25,000 done, then we can think, well, then we have 25% of the units laid. So that gives us a reasonably good indicator of the work completed, especially the physical work completed. Doesn't always perfectly indicate the time, the work involved, and I'll give you some examples, because things aren't, with most of these measurements, there's pluses and minuses a little bit, But if it's giving you a pretty reasonable picture, then that's a good basis to go on. So units completed, it doesn't have to just be like a unit like blocks or bricks or that sort of thing. This is a picture of me when I was 20. So I had more hair there. But that was my father-in-law. So this was this porch that I bought this house when I was 19. I got married when I was 19. And so I wanted to put this porch on the front, and I'll talk about this a little more with the lean because there was lots of mistakes that I made with this. Anyways, so you could measure the blocks by area if you wanted to. It's pretty easy to measure it by units though. And so in that case, that might be one way that you'd want to measure it. There's the finished porch. So the porch was actually stone. And stone, you could measure by area if you wanted to. So the area of stone that is placed. So you could have a value that's placed on it by area, how much total area you have to do, and how much you've done. So it could be done that way. Stone, actually, a natural stone was usually you'd buy it by the ton, and then it was assumed you'd get so many square yards out of the ton. And so you'd be able to look at it that way. But what I was trying to say too is it doesn't always represent exactly time. Like this is a very small project. So this one would actually lend itself well to how many days you figured it would take to do it and how far along are you on it, as you'll see in one of the other methods. But if it was a massive amount of stone, it probably would be much easier to just measure it by units. But where I was going with this is, if you're going to do columns like this, it takes a lot more time than to do a straight area like this, right? When you have a lot of short columns, or let's say going back to the example of 100,000 architectural blocks. I'm using this one because of this Calgary Seton Community Center, where one of our graduates was the senior site super on it. And he was telling me about this major problem they had with architectural blocks. So I kind of roughed this out from that. But it's one thing if you have, because it was like huge gymnasiums, ice arenas, that sort of thing, right? But it's one thing if you're doing long straight walls, how fast you go. It's another thing if you're doing a bunch of little washrooms and doorways and window openings and a whole bunch of stuff that slows you down, right? So it doesn't always fully represent how far along necessarily you are time-wise, hours of work-wise. That's the little space between the spaces that I'm trying to say. But generally, it gives you a really good idea. Like in general, it gives you a really good idea. But I think in the back of your mind, you should always keep an idea. Like if you were tracking at just exactly the pace that you expected, but you've done all the big easy walls and now you've got all the little intricate stuff to do, you might have wanted to been ahead a bit in your time frame if you were now coming up to all the intricate work. So you have to keep that kind of in mind with units, because there's factoring that's involved in that aspect of it in reality when you're trying to say what's complete and what's not. Right. And it doesn't have to just be square. You guys have done a lot of estimating. It could be cubic meters or it could be linear feet, depending what it is that you're measuring, but units is units. Incremental milestones. This is different than, just to clarify, this is not like a milestone on a schedule where it's a point in time. This is where it's broken into smaller units, and you can measure the unit for what it is. And it's really sort of how much is this unit supposed to cost? So if we've allowed 4 days for form work and we've allowed 24 hours of work on it, and it's supposed to cost $1,200, how much along are we? How, if we're on day 2, are we 50% complete, assuming an even resource loading on that? And so that's where that comes in, where it's something that's not like you've got the same units that you're measuring all the way. You're looking more at the activities, and broken down to the lowest level, they're considered to be like milestone activities. So just don't confuse it with, you know, the scheduling milestone of 0 days. That's not what that is. It's basically just breaking it down into lower units that we've applied to a cost to. Start and finish is more for payments. So it's not really going to help you for trying to figure out if you're over budget or under budget. This is more for when you're going to get paid for something, and it would tie to your contract. So I put prorated there, and this would not be used in start to finish. But you know how I've shown you in Microsoft Project, it's got, when am I getting paid? Am I getting paid at the beginning of this or at the end of this? Or if it's work, prorated. Well, if it was based on your contract, which might say you get 50% at the beginning and 50% at the end, and this activity is 2 weeks long and it's $10,000, then the day you start, you get 5,000. The day you finish, you get 5,000. That's how that would work. But it could be, however the contract is structured, could be you get nothing till the end, right? So at the end of 10 days, when this activity is done, you get paid 100% of it. So it's good for cash flow measurement if your contract is requiring something along that line. It's not really good for trying to figure out where you're at and are you over budget or under budget. But it may be, say, a consultant who maybe they've got a financial consultant like a quantity surveyor that is following along at where you are in the project and whether your progress payment is eligible for full payment, what they may be looking at if you've agreed to it in the contract. I wouldn't say that's atypical or typical. All right, so cost ratio method is, and I think I had some mistakes in this because this should, so this, just so you know, I think somehow this thing got messed up a little bit, because if that's, I think some of the numbers aren't working. Like this shouldn't, 11% is not 1,300,000 of that. That's too high. So I think some of my numbers might be a little messed in this column, but what it is, schedule of values is you're saying of this $10,050,000 that the general conditions part you valued at 1%. Long lead procurements you valued at 3%. Pre-construction setup you valued at 1%. So you've broken this down, and if you've done it right, you would have the correct numbers based on your total project amount here percentage-wise. So the schedule of values, really, you got to be kind of careful when you're setting up a schedule of values that it's reflective of the work that's going to be done. Now, most contractors are going to try to have higher percentages towards the beginning of the project and smaller percentages towards the end of the project. That's human nature with contractors, because that means, you know, if, let's say, if excavation really is costing 4%, it's nice if I can get 5 or 6%, because that gives me more of the money owing. So I'm ahead. The client works in reverse. If excavation is worth 5%, right? So if excavate, did I say 4%? If this says 5% from the contractor's perspective, the contractor would want to get 6% or 7%. They want to get more money, right? The client, from their perspective, they would probably want to pay 3 or 4%, because I'm a little bit worried that if I pay Jose more money ahead of time, maybe Jose goes bankrupt or disappears on me, right? So I've got to worry about that. Or maybe if there's some problems with the building structure during construction, I don't have much leverage over him. On the other hand, you as a contractor have to worry about, well, how do I pay my suppliers? How do I pay my people? And what if this client goes bankrupt partway through? Then I'm stuck, right? So it's this push and pull that always is going on. Usually, if it's a large project, the client's going to hire a consultant that's going to review the schedule of values to see if proportionately that makes sense with the overall costs. When you agree to this happens in pre-construction, right? So that usually gets settled out there. And so essentially too, you've got in this cost ratio method, you take actual cost to date, what you've actually done, and you divide it by estimate at completion. So that is also being adjusted. All right. So this actually can work too if it was done fairly well. But maybe this original price has changed, right? So maybe this has gone up. So maybe your budget was 1 million, but maybe now to complete it is 1.2 million, or maybe you're not working at the velocity that you expected on the project. So it's costing you more. So it's going to end up being a higher amount. But in this particular case, the estimate for the contract has gone up. So something has occurred in here, but we're taking the estimate at completion as far as percentage of the project that's complete. So that would be, of course, actual cost divided by estimate at completion. Experience opinion. Well, this is for things that it's not so easy to tell, like blocks, units, areas. We can measure it, right? Very easy measure it. Sometimes particular items are not that easy to tell how much of it is complete. So for example, maybe you're installing a chiller or something, and you have an amount for that, and it's a fairly large amount. And you've had to do a lot of rough-ins and a lot of groundwork to get set up for this chiller, and it hasn't even arrived on the site yet. You're saying it's 30% complete because all the feeds that you put into it, basically securing the base for it, all of these, the deposit you had to do for it, and you're saying it's at 30%. Well, a client might say, you haven't even got the chiller here yet. Why would I pay you 30%, right? So sometimes that could get into more dispute. Whereas if you're saying we've got 1,000 blocks laid, well, you could count the 1,000 blocks, right? You could say, okay, they're not lying on that. It's much more quantifiable. This can get a little bit subjective, but you know what? There's some things that you have to do it for because it's not really that easy to measure them that way. So experience and opinion can come in for some measurements. And then there's the weighted measurement method, and it's very similar to the ratio method. So we're going to take our schedule of values and we're going to multiply it by percent complete, but we're not counting, the estimate at completion. We're going by the percent of schedule of values, which is based on the budget, and then how much percent of that is completed. And that's where that comes in. It's not that you can't run into problems with this too, but again, it depends what you're looking at. Curtain walls, you're saying it's 25% complete of all the curtain walls that are done, and the curtain walls are valued at 12% of the overall budget. Then you can debate whether it's 25% of the curtain wall is actually complete. You could do that by measuring the surface area. That would be one way. So at the end of the day, though, really what if we're looking at trying to make cost savings as opposed to just the progress payments, which is a big deal. The progress payments are a big deal. Every contractor wants to try to get paid for the work they're doing as they're doing it as much as possible. You're already in a hole because of holdback amounts due to lien legislation. It's a tough go from a liquidity point of view. But if we're looking at it from a point of view of how are we actually doing on this project, at the end of the day, you're looking at your baseline cost, which would be your budget amount, minus your actual costs. And how are we doing on the overall project up to what we've done and individual line items. And if we're losing in one particular area, why are we losing there? And what can we do about it? So that ties us back to last week when we looked at the direct method and recovery. So that was kind of just telling you the different methods, and you can kind of see there's pluses and minuses to each one. And some things lend themselves well to certain parts and some things don't. And some things are maybe contractually due to how you want to get paid. The second part, I kind of introduced lean. And so I'm just going to go over a few points with this. This particular uh, note I got from the Lean Construction Institute of Canada, LCI Canada. I put the web link down there. Probably if you put it in presentation mode and click it, it'll bring you to the site. It's an interesting site. LCI, I think, has only been, LCI Canada has only been around, I think, about 4 or 5 years. I remember when they started up, and if you check out their members, pretty much every major construction company that's of any kind of size is there. So like PCL, Ellis Don, Bird, Graham, Turner, Walsh. So a lot of the big contractors are there, right? So it's kind of in its infancy as far as an organization in Canada. It is not in its infancy as an organization globally. So I think we were kind of using the US one up to that point. LCI, so really what it sort of delves into the areas that Lean covers. And if we talk about them, one is, right, control on our projects. And so this really means being able to effectively manage our project and being able to measure how we're doing. All right, so system performance. And you can be quite sure that how well you are managing your project is tying to how much your project is costing and how well you're doing compared to your budget. But Lean doesn't really make that term the big focus. It really ties into the next line, which says performance is maximizing value and minimizing waste at the project level. These 2 points are the biggest 2 points of what Lean tries to do. The rest is how it's going about doing it. So maximizing value to the customer. Now that's a very interesting point. Maximizing value, as you see over here, to the customer, where that's a big distinction between, I should remember that's a good question for a test. Maximizing value to the customer. If you're a normal, background, business background, you would think, okay, yeah, I get that, maximizing value to the customer. You would think to the client, whoever is paying me the money for doing what I'm doing. But Lean, the customer is not necessarily only that person. It's for sure that person, but the customer is whoever you're doing something for. So, for example, if I'm the painter, right, and I am going to go in and paint this structure, well, whoever did the taping on the drywall, I would be, so to the drywaller, the painter is their customer. To the drywaller, the painter is their customer because they're providing the surfaces that the painter is going to paint on, right? And even the consultant, so if Robert sends me an RFI and I'm a consultant, right? So Robert sends me an RFI and I'm the consultant, and I answer Robert's questions, right? At that moment, Robert is my customer because I'm providing him with something that he needs. So at that moment, I'm his customer from a Lean perspective, not from a payment perspective that's traditional, just from the way Lean looks at it. Because if we start thinking that way, we start thinking in a more collaborative way. Otherwise, I'm thinking, Robert's kind of bothering me, wasting my time. I got to fill out this response to him and I got no time for it, right? But if I think Robert's my customer, I think a little bit differently if I'm the consultant. That's why we're trying to, as in a Lean perspective. That's not traditional, that's Lean, right? So that you can start to see how that ties here. And also in the control, this part here, planning system performance is measured and improved to assure reliable workflow and predictable project outcomes. So in a future class, I want to go through the last planner system and what we call planned percent planned percent complete, PPC. It's another measurement tool that ties into how reliably this project is going. It's a very simple tool. And sometimes in forms of measurement, if we can be simpler, it's easier. So that reliable word there and workflow is important, and so is predictable. It very much ties to what I did last week when I talked about the wayfinders and trying to be narrow the variation, because reliable workflow requires us not to have too much variation in the work that we're doing. So that's a big deal in Lean too. What we try to do is have a coordinating action through pulling and continuous flow, as opposed to the traditional schedule driven push, right? And push is where we're kind of putting point speed, the speed of each. If we can get all of our subtrades to go as fast as possible, then we should be good. But the truth is that kind of messes us up in traditional construction, because if everybody's out for themselves trying to go fast, that can cause a problem. So if everybody's out for themselves trying to go really fast, then that just means somebody gets in our way and slows the overall project down. So Lean is all about a collaborative workflow that allows for a continuous, consistent flow of work throughout the project. And of course, decentralizing means you don't have sort of a power in the middle, you have more collaboration. And that's where the last planner system comes in really well, in helping to develop the schedules that we follow. Full Lean requires, if you're going to get the full benefit of Lean, it's not going to work on a lump sum project. So it's not going to work on a lump sum project fully. When you have a lump sum project, you have limitations because you're coming in after the design. So you have no influence on the design. The design is done. Full Lean means you're coming in at the design stage so that you can influence the design, and so that the design is based on the value that it's providing to the client, but also it is looking for the most efficient, productive way of constructing it. So if there's something that can be influenced in the design by people that actually do the work, major subcontractors, the GC, etc., then that is where Lean really, really excels, right? We can do Lean on a lump sum, but we can't do the full out Lean. We can do Lean with last planner system and this and the scheduling aspects, the different layers of scheduling that are involved, but we can't influence the design to add the most value to the client. So that's where that sort of interrupts there. Now, where it does, the best contract with a Lean project is IPD, Integrated Project Delivery, where you have a sharing of the profit among the key parties involved in the project, the consultants, the contractor, the major subcontractors. So everybody benefits when the project wins, right? It's not so individualistic. That's a key difference. Whereas lump sum, it's everybody out for themselves, lowest cost bidder, etc., right? So it's a different model. So that's what that last bullet's referring to. So these are key points. And to be honest, like, you can spend hours on each one, right? So you can spend hours of training on each one. Adding value to the customer, I've already kind of sort of highlighted what the customer is. Reduce or eliminate waste. Those are the two key points. One of the ways that we can do that is reduce variation in the work and improve the flow. Variation is where we start something and then we got to stop and wait. So variation comes in where work is waiting for workers or workers are waiting for work. What's the point of rushing? Now you stop because now you caught up. Now you got to wait, or you got to go off site to a different project, and maybe you don't come back, so you hold somebody else up. That is a stop start kind of flow. So what you try to do with Lean is improve that. At the same time, you don't want to put in a bunch of big buffers. You're going to have buffers. So in construction, because we have such unique things, you'll need some buffers. If something goes wrong, you've got some alternative things that you can do. So you have buffers, but you try to minimize them, and you work at constantly trying to minimize them. You're not going to get like an assembly line, but you can get better than the way we currently run our projects. Pull planning is the painter is ready. So that's when you're working it out that you're going to be done. So you're not trying to get done 2 months ahead of when the painter's going to get there. You're trying to get done so that there's that even flow of work. So that stuff doesn't sit around for long periods of time. So the painter is like pulling you towards it, as opposed to you being pushed to go as fast as you can. It also means, like, if you're doing full out lean, we can involve supply chains, because we've seen in the last year that can, disruptions in the supply chains can cause major problems, right? Yes, that's right, Robert. So that's when we get into last planner systems. Should, can, will, did planning. So, depending on what level you're at, whether you're at the milestone phase or at the end, you're at the daily huddles, then that would be the aspect of last planner schedule breakdown. We'll get into that as well. So, because there's a lot more, with lean, there's a lot more pre-planning. There's a lot more engagement of subs and key suppliers early on. You know what? That takes more of their time early on, and they don't like it if they don't understand it. So then they don't want to do it. So it takes an education process as well. But the success has been that once subs actually, you get the standard line. I've been doing it this way for 30 years. Well, I don't want to change the way we do things, right? And you want us to meet daily for a daily huddle. That's wasting time. We don't want to do it, right? So you have to actually make sure that the last planner system is actually built into the contracts, to make sure that they have to commit to actually participating in the big room planning sessions right down to the daily huddles. But the feedback from every big GC that I've done work with, like Bird and Ellis Don, is that this works really, really well. So as far as the last planner system, it is growing in popularity with the bigger GCs. I suspect if you work with a smaller GC, they're not going to know what it is. But if it's a bigger GC like a PCL or any of those, I'd be surprised if I wouldn't say that they've done it on all their projects. That wouldn't be true. But I would say that at least I know with Ellis Don, it's probably at about 60 to 70% of their projects right now across Canada. So that's a pretty large, and it's growing as I speak. So it's one of those things that you're really taking the current system and you're flipping it a bit upside down. And I'll talk about that, because one of the things with the last planner system, when we talk about it, is you actually get all the trades into a room, and everybody's given Post-it notes, and it's a big room. They call it the big room. And you work from the end backwards. Now, not the end of the whole project, but the end of the next big milestone date. So that could be like 4 or 5 months, right? And you work backwards to develop the schedule. So where do we want to be in 5 months? This is what we want to have done. So what has to come just before that? And you work backwards. I can tell you, for me, that was not easy. You're talking about somebody that his whole life kind of looked at, we start here and we do this next, we do this next, we do this next, and we go forward, right? But lean planning, the original, when you're breaking it down, you go backwards. For me, though, once I got my head around it, it worked really well in the sense I could go backwards, but then also once you've done it backwards, then you can just look at it and go forward and see if you have any holes, which is really a good way, which I would recommend for any kind of scheduling, to look at it both ways, going forward and going backwards. Because if you just keep looking at it the same way, you skip the thing you missed. When you look at it a different way, all of a sudden something jumps out at you. It's kind of like if you read, you write something and you proof check it. Well, you keep missing the same mistake. So after you submit it, it's like, how did I miss that? I looked at it 3 times. How did I miss that word? But if you look at it from a different perspective, then you see things you don't normally see. But that's not the reason Lean does it. Lean does it more from the customer perspective. I'm the last person on the last task. What do I need to have done to start this task? Well, I need to have the drywall taped. I need to have the baseboard on. What do I need to start painting, right? And so then you're looking, okay, what comes prior to that? And you just work it backwards. So that's the last planner system. Supply chain management. Design integration is where I said if you're going full Lean like IPD. There's not much you can do here if it is lump sum. And then there's a whole bunch of tools that Lean utilizes to break things down. And slowly you've been sort of seeing a lot of the tools that I've been sort of trying to give you a tool a week sort of idea are kind of, they're not all from Lean. Like VUCA's not necessarily, anything that leads to adding value and eliminating waste could be considered a Lean tool. I wouldn't say VUCA's a front and center one, but I think it is an important tool. The Pareto principle is at the very foundations of Lean. That really came out from the work of Deming and particularly J.M. Juran in the 1950s. He rediscovered the Pareto principle from the Vilfredo Pareto economist. And for sure, today's one at the end, which is the 5 whys, is one of the most used Lean tools there is. So when I did the video, I'll let you guys look at the video for that, but that's where that sort of ties in. So I kind of go in the video over these 2 points, and this is like a theme that you see throughout. And the goal is not to have workers waiting for work. The goal is not to have work waiting for workers. The goal is to have a smooth, steady progression. And just like I kind of like to use metaphors when I try to explain things, like when I came up with the Wayfinder aspect of going from a project, they like to use metaphors as well. So they have this metaphor that they use all the time, which is you can think of a river flowing in a construction project, like the flow of activities. And then you know what? We got all these rocks in the river, and the rocks kind of impede the flow of work. And so the goal in Lean is to remove as many of the rocks as possible. So the obstacles that is preventing you from being able to do the work in a nice continuous way, you're trying to identify them and remove them. That's one of the good things going to Last Planner system is you have the people that know their work and you are trying to engage them and you want them to tell you what is going to slow them down so that you can remove those obstacles so they don't get slowed down. And then because Lean is all about continuous improvement, once you get the rocks out of the way, they have another metaphor, you lower the river. So you lower the river because there's more rocks underneath the surface, and then you keep working at it. So it's a never-ending process, right? So then it goes in the 8 areas of waste. And I kind of did this with you with site management. So I'll let you look at the video for that, and you can see that. So I kind of go over this with that porch that I was doing. So to save a few bucks, like I said, I was 20 at a house. We excavated by hand for the foundation, right? So you had to dig down 4 feet. You had to pour the footings, then you put the block wall. And with that, so I had the bright idea. So this is where you waste. A big part of waste in Lean is that you make mistakes, right? And so I had this bright idea that, well, I'll do this part up here, right? Which was basically the backup wall for the stone. And then I had this idea, well, you know what? We'll put all this dirt in it because why would I take it away? There's no basement in this room. I'll just fill it. And then I got greedy and I had the idea, you know what? I'm going to let it settle because we still got dirt left. Why? I don't feel like bringing it away. So I'm going to put water in here. Well, of course, that was way too much pressure and it blew out the wall. And then I had to redo the wall. So that was not fun. And it was all covered with mud and all the neighbors and everything is looking around. And I'm like 20, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So, but you learn from it. That was a good lesson on hydrostatic pressure, right? So you can bet that any house and any addition and anything that I ever backfilled, there was good shoring against it. And I was very cognizant. And if I could get the flooring in to laterally support it, then I would do that, right? So it's good to recognize when you make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes going on. It's not good if you don't learn from your mistakes and you keep making the same mistakes over and over again. So lean is all about trying to learn from what's being done and recognizing that nobody is doing things perfectly and there's always room for improvement, and building a culture, because it's very much about building a culture of people that are thinking like-mindedly as far as adding value and reducing or eliminating waste. So that's a big part of it. So that means not the finger pointing, you know, Tom, you screwed this up, it's costing us X amount of dollars. And then of course, Tom's not going to want to show anything or try anything or be very nervous about things from that point forward. You're not going to get their full engagement. So it differs a lot from those kind of historical ways of doing things. So I'm going to just skip over. These are in the video. You don't, and I talked about them when you guys were in the site course. So I'm not going to, each one of these is important though. Like you'll see in this week's lab, this comes up, right? So when we do this lab, so just make sure you watch the video on it, because you probably forgot it from when we did it in the site management course, that part, the 8 areas of waste. So definitely you want to go through that, because I'll put questions on the test and everything on that. Then I have the 5 whys. And again, I think I do an okay job on the video. So you'll get the sense of what the 5 whys is, but essential, well, 2 things I say: ask better questions and ask questions better. There's 2 different things. Ask better questions is really sort of ask some probing questions that you can dig your teeth into. But the other thing is ask questions better. That means don't put somebody off or don't put them into a corner that they're not going to want to give you a truthful answer. Like that's that part of building the right culture. But the 5 whys itself is keep digging deeper and deeper till you get to an end result. So I kind of go through this process. Usually the reason it's called the 5 whys is when you ask why did this happen once? And again, that would put somebody off because just by the tone. You have to sort of understand that the first level, the first question doesn't get you deep enough. You got to keep going. And it might not, it might only take 3 whys, but it might also take 8 whys or 10 whys. Usually it's around 5 whys deep. You get at the root cause. The goal is to get at the root cause, because otherwise you're treating the symptoms, not the disease, right? You want to treat the disease, not the symptoms. And so that's where the 5 whys comes in to trying to reduce waste, right? So you could take this on any of the issues that you might have on a project, and you're trying to get deeper on it. So I'll let people look at the video for that. I go into much more depth. And let me just see if anything else is going on. Yeah. Oh, and Robert, you got that point on that note that you make, reliable promises. So that's another key area which ties into reliability. So trying to get the commitment of the people that are involved. That's where it takes, if it's going to be a lean project, you have to do some upfront training with the trades to make sure that they fully understand what lean is and what it requires. And reliable promises means that people have committed to their promises. And so it really, and reliable promises uses SMART goals as part of it. So we're very familiar with that: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. But what's the C at the end? Commitment. You got to get the commitment. And so that's all about that. So I have this, I'm going to do stop share. Maybe I didn't do that right. I have this, you should find these slides up on Blackboard. I think I've got it right under the lecture 5 slides. So I think I call it the live discussion. Let me see. Yeah. So parade of trade simulation. Can you guys see that? Okay. Okay, great. So I put this here, these 8 videos. I'm not going to make you watch them, but I just put them there because some of you, I know you're really into this stuff and you'll want to watch them. They're not like super long. I don't know. They're anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes each. But what's interesting is this is training that Turner Construction does with their employees, right? So they have their site supers and PMs. It's kind of like training that I actually do with Lean, but I'm going to explain what the process is. And so maybe if you don't fully understand what I end up talking about, then you could check out the videos because it'll make sense to you then. But again, I'm not forcing you. I'm not going to surprise you with a test out of one of the videos or something like that. But for those that want a little extra on it, I think you'll find it very interesting. Turner Construction is a huge American construction company that's now doing work in Canada, specifically Toronto. They've hired a number of our grads as well. So I think it's from that perspective, it's not a bad look at. And they are all over Lean. They've been all over Lean for years. So they're one of the early adopters, I guess you could say. But it's nice of them to share that. It's on a Lean blog, all of these. So it's kind of good of them to do that, I think. So we've kind of, I just want to differentiate here. I'm not going to go through we know this stuff, right? And if you don't, go back in some of the videos that I've already done. But where I want to just clarify here is this. So I've got to teach 2 ways, right? I got to teach sort of the traditional way, and this is the way things are, and this is how it goes. And then there's Lean, and I'm all over Lean myself. So Lean thinking says perhaps we can do better. So I've kind of taught you, well, you know what? If we're short of time and we got to make it up, it's going to cost more, right? Well, Lean is all about maybe we can balance them, that we can actually give the value that the client wants. They want it at this time. They want it at this cost. They want it at this quality. Let's try to deliver the projects that meet them that way. So we don't fall too far behind. We don't end up too much over cost, and we are able to deliver on the quality expectation. We minimize the amount of rework that we end up doing. So that's where Lean differentiates. And even if you watch those videos that Turner Construction does, they at some point mention that as well. It's kind of a theme in Lean. It's not, you know, it's one of those ongoing themes. And so I think about what gets the best results on projects. This is a question, and this is really sort of highlights from those videos too, not this part, but point speed. How fast your subs can do the work, right? That's point speed. How fast can your subs do the work, right? Getting all your trades to work as fast as they can on each task, right? Does that get us the best results? Or system reliability? System reliability. And so planning the work so that every handoff happens as it was promised. So in other words, this person is ready as this one is giving them the baton, right? If this person isn't ready, it doesn't help that this person is running first. Or if this person is rushing so much that they drop the baton and this person's ready, that's not going to really help either, right? So how many times in construction do we have that where somebody is supposed to have something done, but they drop the ball, right? Or they have some quality issues. They got to go back and redo things, and then it delays this person very often. So system reliability is what Lean really tries to work on, rather than push, 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 right? Go faster, go faster. Reliability is very important. Because if you have reliability, you improve predictability, right? And to have reliability, you've got to reduce variation. So this simulation that I'm talking about in the videos, they call it the Parade of Trades. And the Parade of Trades, you know, goes back to the building of the Empire State Building, right? That's where the name Parade of Trades came from. And of course, the Empire State Building was built in 1 year and 4 months. 1 year and 4 months, might have been 3 months. It was very short period of time. You could not imagine building a building of that size and scale today in 1 year and 4 months. That's counting excavation, right? So the Empire State Building actually brought in a lot of elements of lean type construction before there was even lean construction. It managed the supply chain. It had tons of prefabrication done, and there was an even flow of work from the trade. So that's hence the term that the PM gave it from that project. Our project was like a parade of trades moving in a steady flow. If you have a parade and people somewhere in the parade stop, everything backs up behind it. But if everything goes even flow, then that is a nice smooth parade. So there's this simulation that they do in lean training, not just Turner, but everywhere. And it is this, this simulation that they try to review what is the actual flow on a project. So they do this simulation where there's 35 classrooms to be renovated. And there's 7 trades that are involved in the renovation of these 35 classrooms. And they have tables of 7 people, maybe 8, but 7 that each person at the table of the 7 people represents one of the trades. And they give one dice, which has 6 sides, right? So when you roll a dice, you're going to get anywhere from 1 to 6 on the dice. So what they do is they have people figure out, well, what would be the average roll of the dice? And so every dot on the dice represents one classroom being renovated. And if you add up the sides of a dice, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It adds up to 21. Divided by 6, that gives you 3.5 classrooms average a week. So 3.5 classrooms average a week. So then you say, well, how many weeks will it take each trade to finish their work on 35 classrooms? Well, then you say 10 weeks because each trade does 3.5 classrooms per week on average, right? So you take 35 classrooms, divide by 3.5, you got 10. Now there's 7 trades in total in this simulation. Well, how many weeks will it take the team to finish 35 classrooms? Well, the first trade will take 10 weeks. The second trade should finish 1 week later, or 11 weeks. And then it just goes on from there till the 7th trade finishes in week number 16, right? So in a perfect world, right, if we added all of this up, we would have, and it's $1,000 for each room, for each trade, we would have 3.5 rooms. Each trade completes in 10 weeks, 7 trades working 10 weeks. So 3.5 times 10 weeks times 7 trades is going to work out to 245 dots that are rolled, that are capacity, that are done. And so each dot represents $1,000 for the work of that trade because we made it nice and even. That's $245,000. And then if we allowed, say, 15%, that's pretty high, but 15% for profit, we've got 37,000. So what they did in this simulation was they made everybody roll the dice. They made everybody roll the dice. And maybe before I get that far, I'm just going to take a second and I'm going to stop share. Then I'm going to, I've got, Okay. I'm gonna look for this. I don't know where it is. Let's see. Lectures. Okay, I just gotta look for this file I got. Yep, there it is. Okay. So I'm just gonna get this on your screen in a second. Okay. So we got this project, right? 35 classes. And then we got each trade is doing the work. You guys can see that okay? Right? So each trade is doing this section of work. And if I open that up, this is going to look something like this, the way that we've done it. We've got every week, Metal Studs Insulation is going to do, this trade's going to do 3.5 classrooms. Now, this is what we would call, in this particular example, a linear schedule. It's also referred to an LOB or line of balance schedule. And you see this very frequently in work like condominium building, multiple floors. You see it in production homes like Mattamy Homes building thousands of homes a year. You see it in road work where you've got a lot of repetition, okay? And so this is really good for a contractor because, you know, I look at this and I say, all right, so if I'm the acoustic sub, I got to put in the metal studs and insulation in 3.5 classrooms in a week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide enough resources to be able to do that in a week. And I'm going to make sure whatever deliveries I need is going to happen. And the reason I like this, if I'm a subcontractor, is once I put the right amount of resources on that site, then the next week, those resources just go to the next 3.5 rooms. And the week after, they go to the next 3.5 rooms. And the week after that, they go to the next 3.5 rooms. So I know for 10 weeks, let's say I had to do this 3.5 classrooms, maybe I needed 6 tradespeople and 2 apprentices. Well, I know for the next 10 weeks, those 8 people are busy. It's just going to be 1 week, 1 week, 1 week. They're going to get into a rhythm. They're going to go at a certain velocity. They call it a velocity. You're going in a certain direction at a certain speed to do 3.5 classrooms, right? So that's good. Same thing goes with the electrical sub. They're going to start 1 week after they finish. So when they finish these 3.5 classes, then they start the next week. And then when the electrical sub finishes, then the plumbing sub is going to start. And then the mechanical sub, and then so on and so forth, right? All the way down to the bottom. So it's going to take 7 weeks to finish the first 3.5 classrooms, right? It's going to take 8 weeks before you finish the first 7 classrooms. It's going to take, you know, you can just add a week to how much when they finish, right? So that's the way that that will flow. Now, what they did in the simulation is they, and I'll just put this into maybe tracking Gantt. I put this together, I guess last week I was thinking about it. So I thought this might show it a little bit better. So I put it into the tracking Gantt, and so they're rolling dice based on, you know, how many classes they get done, right? Like they've got, like the dice could be one, you could get one, the metal studs, they could get one done, they could get 6 done, right? Because they're rolling the dice to see what they actually did. And of course, if they only get one done, then it's probably going to take them, you know, 7 or 8 days to finish the 3.5 classes. And of course, that's going to interrupt everybody else, right? All the other flow of work, because they're not working at that rate. So you've got basically a critical path of line items that is drastically impacted by the work when it varies, right? So you get that where it varies, it causes differences. And just because somebody finishes one thing sooner doesn't necessarily mean everything else finishes sooner. So you have this flow of work that will probably get interrupted, because what are the odds that somebody is going to roll the dice that it's going to average out to the 3.5 classrooms? It's kind of slim to none. And so I'll just stop I'll go back to my other slide. So there's variation. When they roll the dice, there's variation. When they do that, this is a perfect world, right? You guys can see the slides with the dice, the PowerPoint, yeah. Okay, so what is actually happening, right? There's variations. And what happens, you know what, on a project, that's what happens, right? There's variations very frequently. So things get held up, and the model indicates everything is linked to everything else, and there is not consistency in the roles. So what does a skilled super or PM do? They want to know who caused this. They want to get more people resources, work extra shifts, work weekends, play the blame game, you know, maybe have to bring in a competitor because whoever the trade is not holding up to it, back charge the culprit, or maybe that's liquidated damages. There could be other issues, replace the performing sub, you know, that these things all happen. But what's really going on, right? What is really going on? Well, it's almost like you've got a boat and you've got 3 oars on one side and 2 on the other. You not have a nice even flow. There's inconsistency. You're kind of going not in a nice even direction. It's up and down. You got some people are rolling 5s and 6s, while some people are rolling 1s and 2s. No one finished on time, and there was a loss, right? So when they did it and they rolled all of the dice through the groups at the table, they were able to sum up the rolls. And when they did that, nobody made money on the project. So nobody made money on the project when they were using that sort of $245 plus $37,000 example. Nobody made money. So then, because there's such a wide variation with 1s and 2s and 5s and 6s for a lot of them. So what they did was they made everybody at the tables do it again, all right? But you got to keep rolling until you got either a 3 or a 4. Instead of accepting 1s, 2s, 5s, and 6s, everybody got to roll until they had a 3 or a 4, right? And so they still didn't come perfect. Like that's showing it would come perfect. But, you know, you might have had somebody that rolled 4 3s and somebody rolled 4 4s. But the variation was smaller. The variation was smaller. So while not everybody made the $37,000 profit, pretty much, I think 9 of the 10 tables, or so, I'd have to look at the videos again. 9 of the 10 tables were in the money, right? So, and the one table that I think wasn't was barely outside the money. So you dramatically improved the likelihood of being profitable when you reduce variation. Then you're much more reliable and predictable. So it's that aspect of slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It doesn't help us that one trade jumps ahead of everybody else. It doesn't help us that one trade is miles behind everyone else. So engaging the trades very early on in the planning process, and you do, you know, quite frankly, you do have to pre-qualify good trades as well. Lean's not all about always getting the lowest bidder. That's why integrated project delivery works better than the lowest bidder. So 3 and 4, you reduce the variation. So you get closer. So if you remember from last week when I did the Wayfinder aspect and I had the single line going with the baseline, and then I had the deviations, and then I said new technologies, but also better methodologies like Lean are about reducing the variations. You're still going to get variations, but you're trying to reduce them so you don't go so far off course. So that's what that is really trying to espouse and get to the root cause of. So, you know, what do you think the construction industry as a whole is more like? Round 1 or round 2? As a whole, it's more like round 1. We get more variation. So this is where we have a lot of opportunity to save on our projects by implementing processes that help us to reduce variation, minimize buffers. We have to have some buffers, right? So I'm not saying that we don't. So perhaps, you know, you've got to be able to do that. You've got enough resources that maybe you could do 4 rooms during a week. And then when something goes south on you, you're still good. You've got a little bit of buffers built in, but as soon as you got that buffer, you work at trying to reduce it till you have confidence that you can do it in that time period without the buffer. And Lean doesn't work just in time, it works to the most responsible time, which means that if this week's lab will be talking about material deliveries and that sort of thing, you're thinking about, well, when is the best time to get materials delivered? If I get it too soon, it may crowd up my site, it may get stolen, it may get damaged, I may have to move it a multiple of times. Is this a good idea or is it not a good idea? What are the secondary consequences to getting it delivered too early? On the other hand, I don't want to have it delivered 3 days late. Then I got workers waiting for work. There's no materials. I can't do it. So what's the most responsible time given your knowledge of this supplier? If it's a supplier you deal with all the time, it might be the day before. If it's a supplier or a long lead item, it might be the week before. But you're trying to look at what is the most responsible time. So if I'm going to give myself a buffer, what makes sense? And you're giving a lot of thought to it. And you're making your subtrades think that way too. And you've got a process and system for that so that you can ensure that those discussions take place. Last planner system, the last planner is the foreperson on the different trades forepersons, right? It's not the project manager. The last planner is the forepersons for the project of the various trades because they tend to know as you get closer to the work what needs to happen, as opposed to an estimator who's putting together a schedule for a pursuit bid. They don't know. So that's kind of that process that thinks about it. So that's where I was talking about from last week, you know, narrowing the variations. That's what you're always working to try to do. That you can always do no matter what the contract is. That is the 8 wastes and the narrowing of variation and the buffering aspects. Doesn't matter the contract. Those aspects of Lean you can do. It's where you can't really influence the design through the collaboration that you can't do with the other contracts. So does that make some, I don't know why I lost my chat window. It always happens. There it is. Okay, does that make some sense that way? Yeah, for lean, actually, glossary of terminology that all PMP should have. Yeah, that's good. And PMP, they've been really sort of changing their tests in the last few months for project management professional. They're actually including a lot more stuff on Agile, and Agile lends itself pretty closely to lean as well. So Agile have developed out of the computer side of things, but because things are changing so rapidly, even in construction, there's a lot of aspects of Agile that is starting to be adopted too. It's no coincidence that PCL named one of their divisions Agile, which is their prefab division. So yeah, any questions?
Is Agile right in line with Lean and Passive House and all the other different methodologies?
Well,
Is that
what Agile tries to do, because it comes from the computer side of things, where you have,
so it's technology based.
yeah, and it's the aspect that you have a lot of change that goes on. So in our complexity of projects, we get a lot of change orders. This is another area that we got to get into once we get further into this course, is change order management, right? And Agile, of course, changes like change orders or changes in your project, it really impacts all that previous planning work that you've done. And so there's all kinds of time and cost implications. So being Agile is you're not shocked by this. You have systems in place to handle it, and so that you can effectively replan the work. And so your systems are set up that you can easily adapt, adjust, respond to changes as they're occurring. Whereas traditional lump sum, it's very sort of cumbersome in that way, and the way that we have contracts sort of developed. So Agile is trying to make sure that you're able to respond much more flexibly. So if we're talking about like last planner system, it's much easier to respond in an Agile way when changes are occurring, because you're used to working collaboratively. So it's not just that, oh, this change, I wonder what it's going to impact. It can be brought into the discussions, the planning sessions, because you do them collaboratively. And so that helps you to better spot, well, yes, this change to the electrical system is doing this, but it's going to interfere with our ability to do this. So how can we better schedule this out? And what are the cost implications of this to the other trades? It's much more easier to influence that than it is in your traditional manner, where you're meeting once a week and you plan this thing out with not a lot of inputs from other people. And now you've got these changes, and now you're trying to put these changes in, and individually you're trying to let the people know that are impacted by it, but you're missing people along the way. And then that forces you to react, and things don't go very smoothly.
So basically, Agile is a way that they're developing. It sounds to me like it's something that they're using to deal with VUCA, or is it an acronym for something similar?
Well, it's a problem as with regards to defining a hardcore scope and being able to work with it. So there's a manifesto. I'm just the Agile manifesto, which was written not for construction, but was written for software development. I'm just trying to find the actual. This probably isn't quite it, but I'll just pull it up. I can get the actual, there's an actual detailed one, but on short notice. Do you see the 12 principles? Is it on the screen, Robert? Okay. So, and again, this is from the software side, right? But there's a lot of elements that are now being discussed in construction as well. To satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software, welcome changing requirements even late in development. Well, that's a change, right? Harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. Delivering, because my problem is I just pulled this up, it's more of a software. If you go with PMP, they've got a more generic sort of definition. Business people, developers must work together daily throughout the project. Well, that's the collaboration part. Build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need and trust to get the job done. That's the engagement aspect. So that ties to lean in a lot of ways. Well, working software is the primary measure of progress. Well, actual projects that function the way they're designed, that would be in construction. Agile processes promote sustainable development. Continuous attention to technical excellence, goods design enhances agility. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. So that's kind of tying to waste. So they've kind of, this one's just maybe not my best example of pulling it up on a rapid way, but it gives you an idea where there's elements that kind of full align with it. One of the problems with traditional PMP, project management professional, has been it kind of gets associated with developing a static plan, right? Well, PMP never really said that, but things are less and less static today than they were 15, 20 years ago. And that includes in construction. There's more changes than ever in construction projects. So we try to minimize and mitigate a lot of changes. IPD would certainly help to mitigate that because you have people in those areas involved in it at the very early stages. So if there's omissions or things that don't make sense, integrated project delivery can definitely help in that area. So that's part of being agile too, is trying to keep things simple and trying to make sure that it's well thought through, that there's less gaps, but also very much planning things in shorter bursts in more detail, as opposed to the whole overall project in detail. So it does take a little bit of complication in explaining it, but that's what I'll say with that.
Might be handy for the knowledge of people who might want to be applying at PCL over the next couple of days with the job fair that's going on. Which brings me into my question. On Thursday, your class runs smack in the middle of the job fair. Are you cutting the lab class a little bit short, or is it going to be available via video? How are you handling that?
Well, I've been giving every class by video, so that's available. I probably will, this week's lab probably takes me about, I did one this morning, took me about 15 minutes to explain. And so then they were working on it, and you got a week to do it. So, and the video, I'll probably post the video from maybe this morning's lab. This is the same for every lab anyways, whatever I do. So yeah, it's up to you. And if you want to stay, if you want to come in for the first 15 minutes or so, if you miss it, you can look at the video that I'll post. So you got lots of choices. Lots of choices. Yeah. So that should work okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Any other questions? Ali, are you okay?
Yes, Tom, everything is fine. Thank you for everything.
Oh, good. Great. Okay. Don, you're all right? I think he's there.
All good, brother. All good. Thank you.
Okay. All right, everybody, then I'll see you next week, I guess. Have a good week.
You too, Tom.
Okay.
Tom, have a great day.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.